Why did she stay quiet when everyone else would have exploded? That was the question echoing through the dust and heat of Fort Redwood, long before the lights went out that night. They hadn't just tested her patience, they'd made her a target. A staff sergeant had driven his knee hard into her ribs, right there in front of 20 recruits. The same ribs rebuilt after Juan Corin Province. The same ribs that still ached when the air turned dry. He leaned close enough for only her to hear. "Let's see if it breaks again." No one spoke, no one stepped in. The desert swallowed the sound. Avery Cross didn't file a report, didn't shout, didn't even lift her head. She simply exhaled once, the kind of breath that doesn't forgive, it calculates. The desert heat didn't just weigh down that day. It shimmered, rippling off the sand like the whole world was exhaling backward. Spent brass glinted underfoot, dust fusing with metal, sweat drying to salt. Authority here didn't shout. It settled like grit between the teeth. Lieutenant Commander Avery Cross stood near the course perimeter, stopwatch in one hand, clipboard in the other. 36 years old, Navy SEAL, once a legend in quiet circles, now a trainer among strangers. Her uniform was razor-pressed, sleeves rolled 1 thumb width below the elbow, every inch regulation. The left side of her torso was bound tight beneath the fabric, unseen, but never unforgotten. The ache was constant, but it was hers. She stood perfectly still, watching recruits move through the range like pieces on a map she'd already drawn. Across the field, 5 cross-branch candidates hauled stretchers and ammo cans in alternating circuits, dust spiraling from every footfall. Whistles from the towers sliced through the heat every 40 seconds. Staff Sergeant Cole Mercer moved among them, a man who carried his arrogance like a badge. Broad-shouldered, sharp-bearded, and convinced he owned the ground he walked on. Trailing behind him were Corporal Dean Riker, a man built for brute force but not thought, and Private Eli Turner, 21, too confident, swinging his training rifle like a toy. They didn't bother hiding their contempt, didn't even try. "Must be nice," Mercer muttered, loud enough for half the range to hear. "Giving orders after a year of recovery leave. Wonder if the enemy smells like paperwork now." Riker snickered. Turner followed half a beat late. Cross didn't respond. Her pen scratched steadily across the clipboard, recording times and names, each line deliberate. Mercer wasn't done. "Heard they screwed your ribs back together with plates. What they use, recycled canteen metal." A ripple of laughter rolled through the squad. From her post by the comms tent, Private June Carter lifted her gaze. She caught the tail end of that jab, the tone, the cruelty. Her eyes flicked toward Commander Cross, waiting for a reaction. None came. But June noticed something else. Cross's pen didn't just log performance, it marked distances, angles, the pattern of Mercer's approach, the way Riker stood too close, the rhythm of Turner's mimicry. It wasn't note-taking, it was evidence. Petty Officer Hayes Amare stood by the water station, observing quietly. 6 years at Fort Redwood, he'd seen loud ones, soft ones, and the ones who broke. But he'd never seen someone absorb humiliation the way Cross did, not with weakness, with precision. He made a silent note to himself. Stay on the right side of whatever was coming. "Next pair drag and shoulder switch down and back," Cross called, voice level. No emotion, no hesitation, just command. The corporals moved sluggishly, Mercer slower still, his boots carving lazy trails in the sand. Turner passed close by, muttering under his breath, "Didn't know SEALs came in broken models." June Carter's jaw clenched, but she stayed silent. Cross stepped forward, scanning their grip positions, their stances. Still no reaction, no hint of the storm that brewed behind her eyes. She simply watched, calculated, waited. Her silence unsettled them, because silence from a commander never meant surrender. It meant consequence. Mercer caught the stillness and mistook it for fragility. The smirk at the edge of his mouth said everything. He thought he'd won. The desert breathed around them. The wind hissed through steel and scaffold. The world narrowed to the sound of effort and ego colliding. By the time the second drill began, the sun had slipped low, cutting long, golden shadows through the dust. The heat had changed, not weaker, just sharper, more personal. "Weighted carry relay," Cross announced. 50 meters down and back. If your form breaks, so does your time. Boots pounded. Sand sprayed. The rhythm of lungs and grit filled the air, bodies trying to prove something to someone who didn't need convincing. Mercer ran in the second column, pride pulling harder than strength. Turner overreached, chasing approval. Riker lagged, sweat tracing streaks down his face. At the midpoint, Turner's grip slipped, the duffel twisting sideways. Cross reacted instantly, stepping forward, catching it before it hit dirt. "Re-enter your stance," she said calmly. Her hand brushed his wrist to correct his balance. And that's when Mercer charged. He wasn't supposed to. The spacing was clear, but he broke it anyway. Boots grinding, air slicing, the impact came clean, fast, cruel. His knee slammed into her ribs. A direct shot, intentional. The sound wasn't loud, just a muted crack swallowed by sand, but it was final. Cross folded slightly, breath stolen, the air hissing through clenched teeth. Not a cry, just pain converted into data. Mercer leaned close. "Let's see if it breaks again." Every sound around them fell away. Whistles froze mid-blow. Turner stopped mid-step. Riker hesitated. June Carter stood still, her pulse in her throat. Cross pressed one hand to her side. Her face didn't change. Her breathing shifted, shallow, tight, deliberate. "Finish your circuit," she said. No one moved. "I said finish it." Her tone didn't rise, but it cut through the range like a blade. Mercer pretended to catch his breath, hands on his knees. "Guess that plate didn't hold, ma'am." She looked at him once, a glance sharp enough to cut glass. Then she clicked her stopwatch, wrote something, and walked off the line. 17 steps to the medbay. She counted everyone. Each step burned through her side, pain crawling beneath her ribs like barbed wire. But she didn't limp, didn't slow. Each stride measured, deliberate. Her jaw locked, her breath controlled. Mercer wanted proof that he'd broken her. She refused to give it. Behind her, Turner bent to pick up the dropped duffel. His hands trembled. For the first time, shame touched his eyes. June Carter stayed frozen. Those words, "let's see if it breaks again," repeated in her mind over and over, louder each time. The medbay smelled of antiseptic and heat. Cold air fighting a losing battle against the desert. Cross sat on the edge of a steel table, uniform half undone, breathing through the pain as the medic slid the X-ray plate under her arm. "Deep breath," he said gently. She tried, it caught halfway. The image flickered on the screen, 2 hairline fractures along the same rib line as before. "Commander, this isn't something you walk off," the medic said quietly. "You're looking at a minimum of—" "I'm not looking at anything," she interrupted, calm, controlled. He hesitated. "Protocol requires." "I am protocol." Her eyes didn't waver. Minutes later, she signed the limited duty waiver herself. No painkillers, no rest, just a roll of tape and discipline. As the medic left, she unbuttoned her uniform top. The bruise was already spreading, purple, black, old scars meeting new pain. Same place, same story. But this time, the ending would be different. For a moment, the sterile white walls faded. In her mind, cracked mud, gunfire, smoke. Rear Valley, 2019. The explosion, the collapsing wall, the weight on her chest. 5 shattered ribs, 3 fractured, a lung collapsing under her hand as she gave her own coordinates for extraction. She remembered the radio crackle, her co's voice steady through the chaos. "Control isn't silence, Cross, it's command." She stayed awake the entire time. Pain, she'd learned, was just data, and data could be used. The memory dissolved. She tightened the tape around her ribs, one wince no more. Outside the curtain, Boots hesitated. "Come in or go," she said without looking up. "Ma'am," June's voice was small but clear. "He said it on purpose. I heard him, every word." Cross paused. "You have a good memory, recruit." "Yes, ma'am." "Then keep it. You'll need it tomorrow." June swallowed, unsure what that meant, but she obeyed. Cross opened her clipboard. On a fresh page she wrote 3 words. Control, pain, ego. Beneath them, request authorization, reflex evaluation, range 47. She signed it, clipped the file shut, and exhaled slowly. The pain still thrummed under her skin, but it didn't own her. Because some people fight back with fists. Avery Cross fought back with precision. And by nightfall, everyone would learn what happens when calm stops being mistaken for weakness. What kind of person files no complaint, but requests a night drill instead? No one at Fort Redwood knew, but everyone would soon find out. By the time the desert swallowed the sun, her request had cleared. Reflex evaluation, range 47, approved without question. Minimal oversight, blackout conditions. It sounded procedural on paper. But anyone who knew Lieutenant Commander Avery Cross knew nothing she did was casual. At 19:30, the briefing room lights hummed alive. Cross stood at the front, posture straight, ribs taped beneath her uniform. Pain pulsed quietly like a heartbeat beneath steel. Her eyes swept the room, 5 names on the roster. Staff Sergeant Cole Mercer, chin high, arrogance sharper than his salute. Corporal Dean Riker, restless energy, watching Mercer for cues. Private Eli Turner, nervous, his confidence from earlier now replaced with something uneasy. 2 new Navy recruits, silent, wide-eyed, unsure where to look. And near the comms console sat Private June Carter, headset already synced, pretending to check the logs she'd been triple-checking for an hour. Cross laid the file on the podium. The sound was soft, but it commanded the room. Reflex evaluation, blackout navigation, 0 live fire, she said evenly. You'll move through range 47 in staggered pairs. Target is a beacon hidden within the simulated village. Only direct contact permits engagement. She paused. The silence between her words made Mercer shift in his seat. Any deviation from protocol, verbal or physical, will be logged. Mercer raised a hand, his smirk cutting through the tension. Careful, Commander. The dark's bad for old injuries. You sure you'll stay upright? Riker snorted. Turner didn't laugh, not this time. Cross didn't look up. Darkness shows timing, she said, and timing shows discipline. She clicked the monitor alive, showing a simple grid of range 47, broken walls, sand-swept alleys, echo chambers of shadow. You'll be graded on both. Mercer leaned back, muttering. She sneezes, her ribs'll snap like chalk. June Carter heard it through her headset. So did Turner. No one spoke. As the men signed out their training rifles, Cross tapped 2 fingers on June's desk, a silent signal. June slid a compact auxiliary recorder across to her. "Com frequencies are open, ma'am. All teams transmitting live. Private channels buffered." Cross clipped the recorder into her vest pocket. "Good. If they talk freely, let them." June hesitated, voice trembling. "Commander, what if they don't say anything?" Cross looked at her, calm, composed. "They will. Men like that always do. They can't help themselves." That sentence landed heavier than the desert heat. At 22:00, range 47 was darkness incarnate. A mock village, half-collapsed concrete walls, broken windows, blackout tarps shifting in the wind. The red glow of the perimeter rigs barely cut through the void. Every sound was amplified, the rasp of boots, the whisper of dust against metal, the low static hum of comms. Cross stood at entry point Charlie, stopwatch in one hand, thermal goggles hanging loose around her neck. Pain radiated from her ribs, steady but controlled. Across the comms, June Carter's voice whispered through. "Channels live, audio clean." "Copy," Cross replied. The first team, Mercer and Riker, moved out. Their shadows bled into the dark. Turner and one of the Navy recruits would follow 10 minutes later. Mercer's voice crackled over the open frequency. "Come on, Riker, stay tight. Don't get lost in the sandbox." Riker laughed. "You leading the way, old man." Mercer chuckled, arrogant as ever. "Please, I could do this blindfolded." Cross listened, silent, steady. Through her goggles, 3 heat signatures flickered across the simulated village. Mercer leading, Riker trailing, spacing sloppy. They didn't move like soldiers. They moved like men too sure of their own dominance. Riker's signal veered too wide. Mercer didn't care. He was charging corners without clearance, sweeping his weapon mockingly. Cross adjusted her goggles, watching every move. Her breathing shallow. Pain in her ribs flared, a reminder, not a weakness. "Second team ready," she whispered. "Standing by," June replied. "Hold them." On the comms feed, Mercer's tone shifted. "You know what I'll do if she comes near me again." Riker's response came low and smug. "Thought you already did, heard the crack myself." Mercer laughed, a dark, ugly sound. "Didn't drop her. Next time I'll make sure of it." Silence followed. Then June's voice, faint but focused, tagging audio. A soft click confirmed it. The system buffered, copied, logged. Cross's voice came through, quiet, controlled. "Acknowledged." June didn't answer. She couldn't. Her hand was trembling. She could feel the tension crawling through the wires, through her headset into her chest. Mercer and Riker disappeared behind a half-collapsed shoot house, their thermal outlines flickering faint red. The beacon, their objective, pulsed dimly inside. Mercer grinned. "Told you it'd be easy." Riker huffed, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Still think she's watching." "She's probably icing those ribs," Mercer muttered. And then, movement at the doorway. A figure stepped from the shadows. No spotlight, no announcement. Just the faint outline of Lieutenant Commander Avery Cross, framed by red light and dust. She didn't speak for a full heartbeat. Then, "Assessment continuation," she said. "Engage only on contact." Her tone was level, controlled, but the air shifted. Mercer froze mid-step. "You sure your ribs can take it, Commander?" No answer. He smirked and charged. The impact never came. Cross pivoted left, weight low. Her left arm hooked inside his elbow, redirecting his momentum with surgical precision. One shift of the hips and Mercer was airborne. He hit the mat with a thud that echoed through the hollow range. She released instantly. No show, no revenge, just control. Riker blinked, unsure whether to intervene. "That's not protocol," he muttered. "You're still standing," Cross replied. Her voice carried, flat and firm. The comms caught every syllable. June Carter's breath caught in the control room. Her finger hovered over the record tag hotkey, but she didn't need it. The system was already rolling. Mercer grunted, rolled to his knees, eyes blazing, pride bleeding through every breath. He lunged again, reckless, sloppy, more rage than thought. Cross sidestepped, turned her shoulder, and swept his legs out clean from under him. Another thud, louder this time. He gasped for air. The dark swallowed the sound. Still, she didn't shout, didn't gloat, just watched him struggle for breath. "Next," she said calmly. Riker froze. "I'm good," he managed, backing off. "Maintain position." Mercer spat dust, staggered to his feet, pride shoving him forward for one last swing. He grabbed for her collar, a desperate, wild move. Cross shifted weight, caught his wrist mid-reach and turned. Her body moved like a diagram, perfect leverage, no waste. She locked his arm into a standing bar. Controlled, precise. Pain hit him before he could react. His shoulders strained, his knees buckled. "Yield or break," she whispered. He twisted, kicked, struggled, but every movement tightened the hold. "Yield." He spat, voice strangled. "Fine, yield." She released. Mercer collapsed to his knees, gasping, hands clutching his arm. Cross stood over him, breathing heavy, one hand unconsciously brushing her ribs. She didn't show pain, but the tremor in her exhale betrayed it. Then she reached into her vest, unclipped the auxiliary recorder and held it up. "Conduct documented." Mercer's eyes widened. "You can't use that, you set this up." "You made the threat," she said evenly. "You bragged about intent. All I did was complete the evaluation." From the doorway, June Carter stood frozen, headset live, eyes wide. "Recruit," Cross said without turning. "Confirm comms were active." "Yes, ma'am." "Confirm his words are recorded." "Word for word." The silence that followed was deafening. Mercer slumped forward, rage deflated. Riker stepped back, face pale. Turner hadn't even entered the room. He stood just outside the threshold, staring, unsure which side of the story he belonged to anymore. Cross breathed shallowly, her hand pressed lightly to her side, but her voice never wavered. "Consider this contact," she said softly, "fully documented." The drill was over. But the real test, the one about control, had only just begun. What happens after control replaces anger? That's what haunted the halls of Fort Redwood the next morning, the question no one dared to ask out loud. By 800 hours, the sky over the base was still muted with dust, the color of ash and exhaustion. The storm that had threatened overnight hadn't come. It didn't need to. The tension already felt like weather. Inside Command Room 2, the hum of the playback monitor filled the air. No music, no noise, just the sound of truth about to replay itself. Captain Samuel Reed, Senior Operations Commander, sat at the head of the long metal table, a man carved out of precision and silence. Everything about him said, "Measure twice, speak once." To his left sat Lieutenant Commander Avery Cross, uniform flawless, ribs taped tight, clipboard flat before her. The bruises beneath the fabric pulsed with every breath, but her expression didn't reveal it. Across from her sat Staff Sergeant Cole Mercer, arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes burning with the kind of anger that comes from exposure. Beside him, Corporal Dean Riker, who looked like a man realizing a joke had gone too far. Outside the door stood Private Eli Turner, silent, waiting to be called in if needed. And at the far end, Private June Carter, headset coiled beside a printed transcript, her fingers trembling slightly on the edges of the pages. Reed gestured once. "Begin with the audio." June pressed play. The speakers filled with static, then Mercer's unmistakable voice. "If she steps near me again, I'll finish what I started. Those ribs will snap clean this time." Riker's faint chuckle followed. "Thought you already did." Then silence, the kind that weighs more than shouting. Reed's gaze stayed on Mercer. "Recruit," he said evenly, turning toward June. "Was this audio altered in any way?" "No, sir. Captured live from Range 47, Com Channel 3, Standard Buffer Protocol." Reed nodded once. "Corporal Riker, confirm." Riker hesitated. "Sir," he said it, but it was dark humor, maybe. "Dark humor." Reed's voice didn't rise, but the air seemed to still. "You witnessed an intentional assault. You heard premeditated intent to repeat it. Did you report it?" Riker's throat bobbed. "No, sir." Mercer leaned forward, his voice sharp. "With respect, Captain, this is overreach. She set us up, staged the evaluation. We were baited." Reed raised one hand. That single gesture froze Mercer mid-sentence. "Lieutenant Commander Cross," Reed said quietly, "why didn't you file a formal incident report after the initial contact?" Cross met his eyes without flinching. Because they would have forgotten it. This way they remember. Reed's brow tightened slightly, but he didn't interrupt. I led a standard reflex evaluation, Cross continued. Approved under protocol, all movements within limits, every interaction recorded. I didn't retaliate, I verified. You returned to field command with fractured ribs, Reed said. I did my job, she replied. Pain isn't a disqualification, sir, it's data. The room fell into stillness again, a stillness so precise it almost hummed. Reed tapped the transcript folder once with a fingertip. But you recorded him. Cross nodded toward June. No paperwork needed, she did. Mercer scoffed, leaning back in his chair. You can't hang a man's career on a joke made in the dark. Reed stood, slowly. Intent, he said, is now on record. Physical assault occurred, followed by verbal confirmation of escalation. His voice didn't waver. Staff Sergeant Mercer, you are relieved of instructional duties effective immediately. Reassigned to administrative service pending review. You will have no further contact with Lieutenant Commander Cross or her teams. Mercer's jaw flexed. You're ending a career over. Over your choices, Reed cut in, not hers. He turned to Riker. Corporal Riker, failure to report constitutes complicity. You're removed from the evaluation circuit, pending counseling review. Riker didn't argue. He just nodded, eyes low. Then Reed turned toward June. Recruit Carter, well done. You followed chain of command, maintained protocol, and upheld integrity. June's breath shook. Thank you, sir. Reed closed the folder. Lieutenant Commander Cross, you maintained composure and exceeded expectations under provocation. You restored this facility's standard. Cross inclined her head once. Thank you, sir. As Reed reached the doorway, he paused. You could still file assault charges, he said quietly. You still can. I already did, Cross answered, just not on paper. Reed studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once and left. The room exhaled when the door shut. Mercer sat frozen for half a second, then shoved back his chair, metal scraping concrete. You think this fixes anything? You humiliated me, Cross. She didn't look up. No, you did that yourself. He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. Enjoy your victory lap. As he stormed out, Riker followed quietly. Turner caught the edge of the conversation from the hall, his face pale, uncertain. For a long moment he didn't move. Then he saluted Cross. Small, awkward, but genuine. She returned it with a slow nod. When the room finally emptied, June lingered by the playback monitor, scrolling through the final timestamp. The moment Mercer yielded on the mat, the system froze on Cross's face in infrared. Still, focused, unbroken. June whispered almost to herself, Ma'am, why didn't you hit him back? Cross didn't answer right away. She was staring at the screen too. When you hit someone, she said softly, you end it. When you document them, you change the system that protects them. June nodded slowly, absorbing every syllable. Cross gathered her clipboard, her pen, her silence, and walked out. That afternoon, the mess hall was louder than usual in sound but quieter in spirit. Forks scraped against metal trays. Conversations started and died mid-sentence. Mercer walked in first, his uniform sleeves rolled high, chin unbent, pretending. But every table he passed fell silent. Conversations dissolved like smoke. He loaded his tray. No one met his eyes. Not Ortega, not Voss, not even the new recruits who once hung on his every word. Two Navy trainees whispered at the corner table. It's true, the comms caught everything, one said. Word for word. Every syllable said he'd snap her ribs again. And she still dropped him. The first recruit nodded, didn't even strike first, just waited. At another table, June Carter sat with her untouched lunch, headset coiled neatly beside her plate. She didn't talk. She didn't need to. Everyone already knew she'd been the one who tagged the audio. Sergeant Holt, 2 deployments, scar down his jawline, slid into the seat across from her. "We get loud instructors here all the time," he said quietly, stirring his coffee. But what she did, that was a lesson. June glanced up. "For him." "For everyone," Holt said. "I've seen men blow up after disrespect, throw punches, file complaints, ruin themselves trying to prove they're right, but she didn't swing, didn't shout, she just documented. That's the difference between reacting and responding. One makes you feel better for an hour, the other changes the whole damn culture." June nodded, her eyes tracing the steam rising from her mug. The mess hall buzzed faintly around them, but she barely heard it. The doors opened. Avery Cross stepped in. Uniform perfect, ribs bound tight, every movement measured. No music, no applause, no chatter, just the slow shift of posture across the room as soldiers straightened in their seats without realizing why. She moved through the line, quiet, deliberate. Her tray balanced steady in one hand, her breathing shallow but even. Mercer was still at the far table, half turned toward her. He froze for just a second. Cross didn't look his way, didn't need to. She sat near the window, sunlight catching the faint edge of the tape beneath her shirt. The bruise still bloomed, dark as spilled ink. June watched from across the room. Their eyes met once, no smile, no gesture, just a single nod, recognition without words. Because they both knew what had been said, what had been done, and why silence had become the loudest answer. Cross finished her meal in measured bites, left her tray clean, and stood. On her way out, she paused by the doorway, looking out over the training field, the same field where everything had started. The dust had settled now. The brass casing still glinted faintly under the sun. She exhaled slowly, her ribs aching against the tape. "Pain fades," she murmured, almost too softly to hear. "Conduct stays on record." Then she walked out. The story should have ended there. But stories like this never end neatly. That night, long after curfew, June sat alone in the comms bay, replaying segments of the Range 47 recording. She didn't know why. Maybe to remind herself it had really happened. Maybe because she still couldn't believe how calm Cross had sounded when she said, "Yield or break." Through the glass, she saw Cross's silhouette walking the perimeter alone, just a slow, deliberate pace against the desert horizon. No ceremony, no closure, just control. And June understood something new. Some victories don't celebrate themselves. They just stop the noise. How does someone learn to turn pain into silence? That answer began years before Fort Redwood, in the dust and ruin of Juan Corin Province. The desert there didn't shimmer like home, it pulsed. Heat rose off the ground in waves thick enough to blur the horizon, a mirage of safety that never came. A younger Avery Cross crouched behind a collapsed wall, headset crackling with static. 4 heartbeats in her ear, her team, trapped 2 buildings away. The compound was supposed to be cold. It was. "Cross status. Breaching east side, 2 hostiles confirmed," she answered, calm because fear wasted oxygen. Then came the sound no one ever forgets, that low-pitched pop before a world ends. The explosion folded the second floor down like a mouth closing. Concrete wire flame. Her body lifted, weightless for half a breath, before the wall slammed her ribs inward. She remembered the air leaving her lungs, not as a scream, but as data. 5 shattered ribs, 2 crushed, pain translated into coordinates. Her comms officer, Ortega, was pinned beneath rebar. Cross's hand shook as she keyed the mic. "Mayday, 2 down, marking smoke." Her voice cut with static, blood filled her mouth. She kept talking. Control wasn't comfort, it was command. "Cross, hold your position." The commander barked through interference. She ignored it, crawled toward Ortega, dragging her sidearm with one arm, digging through glass with the other. Every breath tasted of copper and sand. Every second was bought with agony. But discipline doesn't wait for permission. She reached him barely conscious, leg twisted wrong. "You breathing?" she whispered. He nodded weakly. "Good, then don't stop." She tied a pressure band with her torn sleeve, pressed the radio to his chest. "You're the relay now. Call extraction. My signal's fried." "What about you?" Cross smiled, faint, broken. "I'll improvise." She pressed a flare into the dirt beside her and drew the rescue grid with her own blood because the marker pen wouldn't work. Red on sand, crude but visible. When the chopper finally came, she stayed awake through the lift, through the morphine, through the surgeon's count to 10. She remembered thinking, if I pass out, someone else loses control. So she didn't. Days later, lying in a recovery tent with her chest caged in metal, she heard her co's voice again. "Control isn't silence, Cross, it's command." She repeated it until it became instinct. Years later at Fort Redwood, those same words echoed every time she tied the tape around her ribs. Every time pain whispered stop, she answered not yet. That night after Mercer's reassignment, the base slept uneasy. Cross didn't. She sat alone in her quarters, uniform folded with surgical precision on the chair, bare light bulb humming overhead. The mirror reflected the purple bloom spreading beneath the tape. Her fingers hovered above the bruise but didn't touch. Outside, wind swept sand against the windows like rain. She closed her eyes and listened to the rhythm of it. In, out, count to 4 again. Pain steadied under discipline. A soft knock broke the pattern. She didn't turn. Enter. June Carter stepped in, still in fatigues, hair loose from the headset band. "Ma'am," she said, uncertain, holding a data chip. "Command asked for the incident file backup. I thought I should bring it personally." Cross nodded, motioned to the desk. "Leave it there." June hesitated. "If you don't mind me asking, how did you do it? Stay that calm." Cross looked up. "Because emotion's a privilege. Discipline is survival." Then softer, almost like confession. "The first time I lost control, people died." June blinked. "In the field." "Juan Corin," Cross said. "We breached without full intel, my call." She didn't elaborate, she didn't need to. The silence filled in the casualties. June swallowed hard. "So this, everything you did here, it's about control." Cross nodded once. "Control isn't power, it's protection. If you can't master your reactions, someone else will weaponize them." June let that sit for a moment. Then she said quietly, "You changed the way people look at things here, ma'am." Cross allowed the faintest curve of a smile. "Change doesn't start loud, it starts consistent." June straightened, permission to speak freely. "Granted." "You scare them, the instructors, the way you don't flinch." Cross's eyes softened just a fraction. "Good. Fear forces reflection. Reflection breeds respect. Respect builds order." She turned back to the mirror. "And order saves lives." June watched her for a moment longer. This woman wrapped in calm that wasn't cold, but deliberate. Then she saluted and slipped out. Cross exhaled, alone again. At dawn, Fort Redwood came alive with the usual rhythm: boots, whistles, engines warming under the orange sky. But something was different. The recruits stood a little straighter, voices carried softer. Even the instructors who once sneered at her name now nodded as she passed, not out of fear, out of awareness. By the obstacle course, Sergeant Holt met her with a clipboard. "Command wants you to oversee the Joint Branch Coordination drill this week," he said. "You good to move?" Cross tested a breath. It caught, but she hid it. "I move fine." Holt studied her. "You sure you shouldn't take the downtime?" "Downtime breeds rust," she replied. He chuckled, half admiring. "You ever rest, Commander?" "Between seconds," she said, and kept walking. As she crossed the training yard, Turner caught up, the young private who had once laughed behind Mercer's back. "Ma'am," he started, awkward. I wanted to apologize for before." Cross didn't slow. "What did you learn?" He blinked. "That silence isn't weakness." She nodded, then apology accepted. Turner smiled nervously. I heard you're running the new simulation tonight. Mind if I volunteer?" Cross glanced at him. "Volunteering doesn't erase mistakes, performance does." "Yes, ma'am, that's what I meant." She almost smiled again. Almost. "Report to range 47 at 2100. Bring discipline." "Yes, ma'am." He jogged off, lighter somehow, like he'd been given a second chance. Later that evening, Cross stood alone at the far edge of the range. The horizon glowed in soft amber. She could see the ghosts of footprints from yesterday's drill, her footprints, perfectly even, unbroken. Wind erased them one grain at a time. She thought about the words Reed had left her with. "You could still file charges." She answered truthfully, "I already did." But the truth went deeper. Her report wasn't about revenge. It was about culture, about ending a pattern that had lasted too long in silence. She knew Mercer's name would circulate, whispered in hallways. But maybe, just maybe, the next instructor would think twice before testing someone's dignity for sport. She drew in a slow breath. Pain flared under the tape, then settled. Control reestablished. A radio pinged softly at her hip. June's voice filtered through. "Commander, comms check. You still on site?" "Affirmative." "Captain Reed requested a follow-up briefing at 900 tomorrow." "Copy." A pause. Then June added, "For what it's worth, ma'am, people are talking. Good things." Cross's tone stayed neutral. "Then we're making progress. Some are calling you the ghost of range 47. That almost made her laugh. Almost. "Ghosts don't teach lessons, Carter. They warn people. See you at 09. She clicked off the radio, looking out toward the training field. The same sun that once burned against her injuries now painted the sand gold. She stood there until the light shifted, thinking about all the times she'd been told silence meant weakness. And all the times she'd proved them wrong. Because silence wasn't surrender. It was precision. And precision kept her alive. That night she slept for the first time in 3 days. Dreamless quiet. But in the distance, the storm that had threatened earlier began to roll in thunder, crawling across the horizon like memory, returning for one more round. What happens when the storm you've been preparing for finally arrives? For most, it's panic. For Avery Cross, it was proof. The thunder started before dawn, distant, low, almost thoughtful. By the time the first recruits reached the yard, the sky was bruised purple, clouds muscling over the desert like an army preparing to surround the base. The wind kicked sand into the air, sharp as glass. Visibility dropped to 30 meters. Fort Redwood moved differently in storms. Engines idled longer, doors slammed harder. Even confidence had a way of shrinking under lightning. Cross stood under the overhang outside the armory, clipboard pressed to her chest, jacket collar flipped high. Rain hadn't started yet, but the static in the air made her skin prickle. She watched the recruits huddle near the motor pool, some laughing nervously, others fidgeting. Storms always showed you who listened and who only heard. Behind her, Sergeant Holt jogged up, half-soaked already. "Morning, Commander," he called, shaking out his cap. "Command wants all outdoor drills suspended." "Suspended?" Cross raised an eyebrow. "The storm isn't here yet." "Not the point," Holt said. "Visibility's bad, lightning's close, they don't want unnecessary exposure." Cross looked past him at the recruits. "Discipline isn't taught on calm days, Sergeant." He gave a small laugh. "You always have to make it poetic, don't you?" She ignored the joke. "They'll run the relay under supervision, 5 minutes max, then we clear the field." Holt hesitated but nodded. "You're the ranking officer." The first gust hit as she gave the signal. The wind carried the smell of metal and ozone, that electric breath before the storm's throat opens. "Form up," she called. Her voice cut through the roar cleanly, no louder than necessary. Recruits scrambled into position, heads ducked, eyes squinting against flying grit. Private Turner took lead with a team of 5. He'd improved since Range 47, more focus, less ego. Cross noticed. She said nothing. Praise wasn't currency here, performance was. "Stay tight, 20 meters between pairs," she shouted. The first flash of lightning cracked overhead, turning the range white for a heartbeat. Then the wind came. A wall of sand and rain tore across the field, swallowing sound and sight. Holt cursed under his breath. "Commander, we need to." "I know," she said. Her tone was calm, but inside, her ribs pulsed against the tape, pain reminding her where weakness used to live. Another flash. Then chaos. A radio burst in her ear. "Turner's team, we've got a man down." "Location," she demanded. "North Barrier, visibility 0. Cross didn't hesitate. She dropped her clipboard, pulled her hood tight, and moved. The wind was alive now, screaming across the base like a wounded engine. Holt followed, shouting, but his voice was lost in the storm. Sand scraped her face. Rain hit sideways, turning the ground to sludge. Every step was a fight. She reached the North Barrier, a collapsed segment of training scaffolding. Through the veil of sand, she saw shapes, 2 recruits lifting debris, 1 crouched low. "Report," she barked. Turner's voice came strained. "Corporal Dyer's leg pinned under frame. He's bleeding." Cross dropped to one knee beside him. Tourniquet, top pocket, red strap. Turner fumbled, hands shaking. Cross took it from him, fast, clean, tight above the wound. Dyer groaned, half-conscious. "Stay with me, soldier," she said evenly. Lightning flashed again, closed this time, the thunder immediate. Holt's voice cut through static on the radio. "Evac team en route, Commander. 2 minutes." "Make it 1," she snapped. She leaned over the recruit, rain streaming down her face, sand grinding into her palms. "Listen to me," she said quietly to the injured man. "Pain's just data, you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, confused. "What?" "Pain means you're still in control. Don't give it away." He nodded weakly. The metal beam shifted as the wind changed. Turner braced it with both arms, his face twisted with effort. "It's slipping." Cross pressed a hand to her ribs, feeling the flare of old pain, and pushed anyway, shoulder against the beam, breath shallow, movement precise. The kind of motion that ignores history because there's no time for it. Together they held until the evac team arrived. Hands replaced hers, voices shouted, lights flared through the storm. As medics lifted Dyer onto the stretcher, Turner looked back. "Commander, your ribs." "I've had worse," she said. He opened his mouth, but her stare stopped him. By the time they reached the command hallway, rain hammered the roof like artillery. Cross wiped the grit from her face and leaned against the wall for a single breath. Just one. Her side screamed. Holt appeared beside her, soaked, breathing hard. "You should be in medbay." "Later." He sighed, half annoyed, half admiring. "You don't bend, do you?" "Not unless it's tactical." He chuckled softly. "You know the recruits, they're talking about you again." She tilted her head. "What now?" "They're saying you don't flinch in storms because you've seen worse." Cross's eyes flicked toward the window where lightning painted the horizon. "They're right." Hours later, when the storm finally broke, Fort Redwood looked like it had survived a siege. Mud pooled in the courtyards, equipment scattered. The flag was torn halfway from its line, snapping weakly in the wind. In the mess hall, silence reigned again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was awe. Turner sat with June Carter, replaying the moment in his head. "She didn't even pause," he said. Wind was throwing everything sideways and she just acted, like it didn't matter she was hurt. June stirred her tea slowly. She doesn't believe in hesitation. She could have died. She already has, June said softly, just not the way people think. Turner frowned. You mean? June shook her head. I mean, she lives like someone who's already paid the cost. That's why she doesn't waste energy on proving anything. Turner stared at his cup, silent. Then, still, I've never seen control like that. June smiled faintly. It's not control, it's choice. That evening, Captain Reed summoned Cross to his office. She arrived on time, damp uniform, steady stride, clipboard tucked under her arm. He looked up from his desk, glasses low on his nose. I read the incident report. You stabilized a recruit with a crushed leg under open lightning. No evacuation delay. Efficient. Cross remained silent. Reed leaned back, studying her. You're aware that risk exposure during storms violates protocol? Yes, sir. Then why proceed? Because protocol doesn't save seconds. Discipline does. He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded once, almost grudgingly impressed. Still the same as Juan Corin, he said. Her jaw tightened. You read that report? I did, Reed replied. You stayed conscious with 5 broken ribs to call your own medevac. I thought they'd exaggerated. Clearly not. Cross said nothing. Reed sighed, softening. You know, there's a thin line between command and martyrdom, Cross. Be careful which side you stand on. Her gaze stayed steady. Sometimes they overlap, sir. He allowed himself the faintest smile, dismissed. Outside, the storm had left puddles across the tarmac, reflecting the hangar lights like fragments of another sky. Cross walked slowly, boots splashing through shallow water, the air smelling of ozone and earth. She reached the flagpole. The torn flag hung low, heavy with rain. She reached up, untangled the rope and reset it herself, each knot tight, precise, deliberate. Then she stood back and looked at it, torn but flying. Her ribs throbbed with every breath. Her body wanted rest, but her mind, it was calm. This was the quiet after the fight, the place she understood best. She thought about the recruits watching from the mess windows, about June's steady faith, about Turner's apology, about the way Mercer's arrogance had cracked and disappeared into paperwork. Some people leave their mark by shouting, others by enduring. She turned toward the barracks, whispering to herself, storms don't test strength, they reveal structure. And somewhere in the night, the wind agreed. How do you train someone when they remind you of everything you try to forget? That question met Avery Cross 2 mornings after the storm. The sky over Fort Redwood was washed clean, blue and cruelly bright, like the world was pretending nothing had happened. The range glittered with drying sand, puddles shrinking under heat. But inside the administrative hall, the air was still thick, with paperwork, politics, and unspoken history. Captain Reed stood by the window, sunlight cutting sharp lines across his desk. He didn't look up as she entered. Close the door, he said. She did. There's a message from Joint Command, he continued. A visiting unit from the 212th Recon is being transferred here for a 2-week tactical alignment program. Cross waited. She heard the tone in his voice before, the one that hid something heavy behind procedure. Reed turned. They've requested you personally. That got her attention, me. He nodded. Apparently, your record from Juan Corin made its way up the chain. One of their new leads, Lieutenant Mara Keene, served under the same battalion command years later. She requested mentorship. Cross's jaw tightened at the name. She remembered it faintly. Keene had been a comms tech during the extraction rotation. Barely 20 then, too young to know what real chaos cost. Commander, Reed said carefully, this isn't a request you can decline. I wasn't planning to, Cross replied. Good, then you'll meet them on Range 9 at 1600. And Cross. She looked up. Don't forget, not everyone learns discipline the way you did. That stayed with her long after she left the room. By 1600, the sun was brutal again, high, white, and merciless. Range 9 was smaller than 47, a maze of walls and rusted vehicles, good for movement drills and simulated extractions. Cross arrived first, clipboard in hand, ribs wrapped tight, every breath still measured. The visiting team arrived in a transport Humvee, dust swirling around its wheels. 5 soldiers stepped out, lean, sharp, restless, but one stood straighter than the rest. Lieutenant Mara Keene, early 30s now, eyes focused, jaw set, hair cropped military short. She moved with the kind of precision that came from trying too hard to look unbreakable. Commander Cross, Keene said, extending a gloved hand. It's an honor. Cross took it, firm, deliberate. We'll see if you still think that after the drill. Keene smiled thinly. I read your file, I think I'll manage. Behind her, one of the men snickered. Is this the same SEAL who got her ribs busted in a training eval? Cross didn't react. She just looked at him, long enough for the laugh to fade. Names, she asked. Keene straightened. Sergeant Locke, Specialist Tran, and Privates Vega and Mills. They're sharp, just need refinement. Cross's tone stayed even. Then let's refine them. The first exercise was simple, rescue simulation under heat stress. Pairs had to locate and extract a weighted dummy through narrow corridors under time constraint. But the 212th team was all muscle, no communication. Locke barked orders, Tran argued, Mills froze. Keene tried to mediate, but her voice got drowned out. Cross observed, arms crossed, stopwatch ticking. When the timer buzzed, she said nothing, just walked into the field and crouched beside the dummy they'd left half buried in the sand. Who gave up first? Locke shrugged. We hit time, mission failed, happens. Failure isn't a mission parameter, Cross said. It's a decision. Locke's smirk faded. With respect, ma'am, this isn't SEAL school. We don't need to be perfect. Cross met his eyes. You need to be accountable. Silence followed. Then she turned to Keene. What did you see? Keene hesitated. Breakdown in communication. Chain of command fragmented after first obstacle. Correct, Cross said. And what caused it? Keene took a breath. Ego. Cross nodded once. Fix it. They ran it again and again. By the 5th run, the air shimmered with heat and frustration. Sweat-streaked uniforms, tempers frayed, but something started to change. Voices dropped, movements synchronized, mistakes became lessons instead of excuses. When the timer buzzed the last time, they had the dummy clear of the field. Barely. Keene exhaled hard. Extraction complete, ma'am. Cross checked her watch. 17 seconds over, but progress noted. Locke muttered something under his breath, something about unrealistic standards. Cross caught it. She didn't respond, not right away. She let the silence linger long enough for the weight of it to land. Then she said quietly, unrealistic standards save lives, comfortable ones bury them. No one spoke after that. After the session, Keene caught up as Cross packed her clipboard. You were right, Keene said. Ego. It always finds a way in. Cross gave a faint nod. It's louder than fear, but quieter than regret. Keene tilted her head. You sound like someone who's buried both. Cross didn't answer, but something in her eyes shifted, a flicker of something old and distant. Keene hesitated. I heard about Juan Corin. What happened to your team? Don't, Cross said softly, cutting her off. They're not lessons, they're ghosts. Keene swallowed, nodded, understood. Cross looked at her, really looked. You requested me for a reason. Why? Keene's voice steadied. Because control looks different from this side of command. I've lost people too, and I'm tired of pretending that doesn't change how we lead. Cross's expression softened for the first time. You'll make a better leader if you let it. Keene frowned. You mean if I care? No, Cross said, if you care without crumbling. They stood in silence for a moment, wind sweeping across the range. Then Cross said quietly, run it again tomorrow, same time. This time you lead with silence. Keene blinked, silence. Cross nodded. Don't shout, don't explain. Let them find discipline in your restraint. It was the lesson she'd learned the hardest way. That night back in her quarters, Cross sat by the window with the lights off. The desert stretched endless beyond the glass, dotted with faint perimeter lights. She thought about Keene's words, about pretending loss didn't change you. She'd done that for years, worn composure like armor. But somewhere beneath the tape and uniform, the fractures still hummed. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Come in, she said. June Carter stepped inside, holding a data pad. I logged the 212th training metrics, ma'am. They're rough. Good, rough is honest, Cross replied. June hesitated. You think Keene's ready for this? Cross looked out the window again. No one ever is. You don't get ready for leadership. You just stop waiting to be. June nodded, half smiling. You sound like Reed. I sound like experience, Cross said. June lingered another moment. You ever think about leaving, ma'am, after everything? Cross took a long breath. Leaving isn't the same as healing. I'm not done teaching people how not to break. June's eyes softened. You really believe you can fix the system, don't you? Cross shook her head. Not fix, influence. June smiled faintly. You already have. Cross looked back out at the horizon, where the last bit of light faded into gray. Then I'll call that progress. The next day, the 212th returned to Range 9. No laughter this time, no arrogance. Just quiet readiness. Keene led them exactly as instructed, voice low, commands precise. Cross watched from the edge of the range, arms folded, expression unreadable. They moved through the simulation, fewer words, tighter movements, steady rhythm. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. When they reached the end, Keene turned to Cross, chest heaving. Improvement, ma'am. Cross gave a single nod. You led, you didn't command, there's a difference. Keene exhaled. That's the part they don't teach you. Cross smiled faintly. That's why I'm here. For a moment, the two women just stood there, teacher and student, soldier and survivor, bound by something unspoken but understood. And as the wind swept through the range again, carrying dust and echoes from drills long finished, Cross realized something she hadn't admitted even to herself. She wasn't just teaching them control. She was teaching herself forgiveness. What happens when control meets chaos for real? Not in simulation, not in theory, but in the flesh. That answer came faster than anyone expected. It was supposed to be another training day. By noon, Range 9 was humming with motion again. Dust clouds, shouted times, the dry percussion of boots on sand. Avery Cross watched from the command platform, arms folded, expression calm but eyes scanning for details no one else saw. Lieutenant Mara Keene's 212th Recon Unit had been improving, communication cleaner, posture sharper. Even Sergeant Locke had stopped rolling his eyes at every correction. Progress, Cross thought, never arrives with fanfare. It creeps in quietly, one mistake less than yesterday. Then the siren went off. A single tone at first, then the second. Low, urgent, real. Holt burst from the comms trailer, headset askew. Commander, explosion in motor bay, fuel line rupture, fire spreading to ammo depot. Cross didn't move for a heartbeat, then. Evacuate Range 9. Get me status on containment. Already sent teams, but Depot 2's got live rounds stacked. Then we don't have time, she cut in, grabbing her radio. Carter, patch me to emergency frequency, now. June's voice crackled through, high with static. Connected, ma'am, winds pushing smoke east. Cross looked that way. The sky over the base was bleeding black. Flames coiled upward behind the motor hangars, licking at the horizon. Reed's voice snapped through the channel. All non-essential personnel clear perimeter. Command units maintain safe distance. Cross keyed her mic. Negative, Captain. We have personnel inside the secondary bay. A pause. How many? Unknown. Reed's tone hardened. Then wait for fire response. That's an order. She exhaled through her teeth. Copy. But orders were only words, and words didn't move debris. The blast had torn through the west side of the motor pool, scattering twisted metal and burning rubber. The heat hit like a wall, choking, relentless. Cross reached the perimeter just as an engine tank collapsed, sending sparks across the ground like shrapnel. "Ma'am, you can't go in there," Holt shouted. She was already moving. Her ribs protested with every breath, the old fractures singing through the tape, but her stride stayed even. Smoke clawed at her eyes. The air turned thick enough to chew. Inside the hangar, she found Private Vega from the 212th, pinned under a fallen beam, fire crawling closer. "Commander," he coughed, "leg can't move." Cross dropped beside him, scanning the wreckage. The beam was wedged against a collapsed tire rack, too heavy to lift clean. She looked up at the doorway. "Keene," she called. Mara Keene appeared through the haze, eyes wide, coughing hard. "I told you we had people in here." "Get a lever bar now," Cross ordered. Keene disappeared into the smoke, reappeared seconds later with a steel rod. Together, they jammed it beneath the beam and heaved. The metal groaned, shifted just enough. "Vega, crawl." He dragged himself free, gasping. Keene pulled him toward the exit, arm over shoulder. Cross followed, lungs burning. Outside, medics rushed in, foam sprayers cutting white arcs through the air. Cross bent forward, hands on her knees, coughing smoke until it tasted like iron. Reed's voice roared through the radio again. "Commander Cross, I told you to hold perimeter." She keyed the mic, breath still ragged. "Mission accomplished, sir. Casualty recovered." "God damn it, Avery." But the line went dead before he finished. 2 hours later, the fire was contained. The motor bay was half gone, blackened steel, melted glass. Cross sat on the bumper of a fire truck, jacket off, uniform streaked with soot. Her ribs screamed, but she ignored them. Pain was familiar, regret was. Keene walked up, face smudged, voice hoarse. "He's stable. Medics say second-degree burns, but no internal damage." Cross nodded. "Good." Keene looked at her for a long moment. "You disobeyed an order." "So did you," Cross said. Keene's mouth twitched. "Guess you're a bad influence." Cross managed the faintest smile. "I prefer practical." For a while, they just sat there, silent except for the distant hiss of cooling metal. Finally, Keene said quietly, "When the siren went off, I froze for half a second. I thought about protocol, evacuation steps, checklists. You didn't think, you moved. How do you know when to break the rules?" Cross stared at the smoke curling into the sky. "When the cost of waiting outweighs the cost of pain." Keene nodded slowly. "That's not in any manual." "Neither is survival," Cross said. By evening, the adrenaline had worn off, leaving only exhaustion, the heavy kind that lives in the bones. Captain Reed found her in the medbay, arm bandaged, oxygen mask off to one side. He closed the door. "You defied a direct order." Cross didn't argue. "Yes, sir." "You went into a live fire zone with fractured ribs." "Yes, sir." "And pulled 2 people out." "Yes, sir." Reed sighed, rubbing his temple. "You drive me insane, Commander." Cross looked up at him. "Would you rather I let them burn?" His expression softened just slightly. "You know that's not what I'm saying." "Then what are you saying?" "I'm saying I promoted you because you embodied control, not recklessness." She met his gaze evenly. Control isn't the absence of risk, Captain. It's measured defiance. He leaned against the wall, studying her. You really believe that? I lived it. Reed exhaled, defeated. Next time, at least pretend to ask first. I'll consider it, she said. He laughed once, dry and tired. You're impossible. Accurate. As he turned to leave, he paused. You know, the recruits saw you out there, words spreading. She raised an eyebrow. What are they saying now? That you don't bleed, that you're not afraid of anything. Cross looked at the floor. They're wrong. Reed tilted his head. What are you afraid of? Losing composure, she said quietly. Because once you lose that, you lose people. Reed nodded slowly. Then keep that fear, it suits you. Later that night, the base was silent except for the hum of generators. Cross walked the perimeter alone, the smell of burned fuel still thick in the air. The stars above looked almost clean against the wreckage below. At the edge of the motor pool, she stopped. The ground was blackened, the metal twisted, but amid the ruin, something small caught her eye. A half-melted stopwatch, its glass cracked, its hands frozen at the moment of detonation. She picked it up carefully, brushing ash from the face. Time literally stopped. She turned it over in her hand and whispered to herself. Control ends where courage begins. Her reflection shimmered in the broken glass, tired, older, but still standing. In the barracks that same night, June Carter sat beside a sleeping Vega, the rescued soldier. She looked up as Cross entered quietly. He'll live, June said softly. Good, Cross replied. June hesitated, then asked, was it worth it, ma'am, going in? Cross considered the question. Pain fades, discipline lasts, but saving someone, that's the only thing that keeps both worth enduring. June smiled faintly. That's what I thought you'd say. Cross looked down at the bandaged recruit. He'll remember that someone didn't panic. That matters. June nodded. You're changing more than procedures, Commander. Cross shook her head. I'm just proving they work. But as she left the infirmary, June noticed something rare. A small tremor in her hand, just for a second. Even steel has echoes. Outside, the desert wind returned, gentler now, sweeping through the empty corridors of Fort Redwood. Somewhere behind the hangars, a loose piece of sheet metal rattled in rhythm, a heartbeat of the base itself. Avery Cross paused, listening. Then she whispered into the dark. Control isn't silence anymore. It's knowing when to break it. And for the first time in years, she smiled without pain. How do you measure a soldier? By the scars they hide, or the standards they raise? That question waited for Avery Cross the morning after the fire. Fort Redwood woke slow that day. The sky was gray-blue, washed clean, the kind of calm that comes only after something tries to destroy you. Smoke still ghosted from the far end of the motor bay, curling into the wind like a last apology. Cross stood on the tarmac at sunrise, coffee cooling in her hand, ribs bound tight, uniform pressed sharper than reason. Behind her, the base moved in muted rhythm, repair crews, clipboards, the hum of machinery returning to life. Commander! Captain Reed's voice carried softly across the air. He approached with a folder tucked under one arm, expression unreadable. The inquiry's at 900, he said. They'll want a statement. Cross nodded, understood. Reed studied her face. You could say you acted on instinct, blame, adrenaline, miscommunication. They'd accept that. I won't. You'd be safer if you did. Cross met his eyes. I'm not here to be safe, sir. I'm here to be accountable. Reed exhaled slowly, a hint of pride hidden under the worry. Then go do what you always do, make them believe in discipline again. The inquiry room smelled of paper, coffee, and quiet judgment. 3 officers sat behind a long table. Cross stood alone before them, back straight, hands clasped. Colonel Hendricks, the presiding officer, leaned forward. Lieutenant Commander Cross, we've reviewed the incident at Depot 2. You directly disobeyed Captain Reed's perimeter order. Confirm. Yes, sir. And entered a live fire zone to extract personnel. Yes, sir. Why? Cross's answer came steady, even unhurried. Because the time it would have taken to wait for confirmation would have cost a life. The order was correct for policy, incorrect for the moment. Murmurs rippled down the table. Hendricks raised a hand. So you decided your judgment outweighed command protocol? No, sir, Cross said. I decided that leadership sometimes demands risk no protocol can predict. The room stilled. Major Alcott, the youngest on the panel, tapped her pen. And if you died in there? Then it would have been a tactical miscalculation, Cross replied, but not a moral one. Silence. Even Penn stopped scratching. Hendricks cleared his throat. You're aware defying a direct order is grounds for formal reprimand? Yes, sir. And you accept full responsibility? I do. He studied her for a long moment. Any final statement for the record? Cross's eyes lifted to meet the panel's. Control isn't about never breaking the rules. It's about knowing when the rule was written for peace and you're standing in a war. The colonel's pen stopped. Then slowly he nodded. Noted. When the doors opened, the hallway outside was quiet. June Carter waited there, data pad clutched to her chest. How'd it go, ma'am? Cross allowed herself a small smile. I told the truth. Now they decide what that's worth. June hesitated. People already decided, ma'am. They saw what you did. Cross tilted her head. And what do they think? June's voice softened. That you're the standard now. Cross looked down the hall, the long, sterile corridor that always smelled like rain in memory. Standards change, she murmured, but maybe this one can stay a while. By afternoon, word spread faster than any report. The panel had cleared her of misconduct, citing situational judgment under extreme conditions, consistent with exemplary command presence. Reed found her outside the mess hall, the faintest grin under his serious face. They gave you commendation instead of a reprimand. You just rewrote the textbook, Commander. Cross took the envelope without opening it. I didn't want a medal. I know, Reed said. That's why you deserve one. He started to walk away, then stopped. You planning to stay at Redwood? Cross looked out toward the range. For now, there's still work to do. He nodded once, then I'll keep the chair warm. The next evening, the base held a small ceremony. No cameras, no speeches, just soldiers gathering at sunset in the training yard. The flag hung steady again, its new stitching visible only up close. Recruits from every division stood shoulder to shoulder, some still bandaged, some new. Keene's team was there too, Vega on crutches, locked quieter than usual, Keene herself standing tall beside June Carter. Cross stepped forward only when Reed gestured. She didn't stand behind a podium. She didn't clear her throat. She just looked at them, faces lined with sweat, dust, belief. When I got here, she said, voice low, this place confused silence with weakness. It still does sometimes. A faint ripple of laughter. She went on, but silence isn't absence, it's discipline, it's how we decide what deserves sound. The wind stirred, no one moved. Control, she said, doesn't mean you feel nothing. It means you choose what feeling becomes action. Yesterday it was control that saved you. Tomorrow it'll be someone else. That's how standards survive. She paused, eyes finding June, then Keene, then Turner at the back of the crowd. And if you ever forget what discipline looks like, look at each other, because calm isn't cowardice, it's courage trained. She stepped back. No applause followed, only a hush that felt stronger than any ovation. Reed broke it gently, dismissed. The recruits filed out, their voices quiet, like the base itself was absorbing what had just been said. Later, under a dark sky rimmed with stars, Cross walked the perimeter road alone. The desert was finally still. Every sound, distant generator hum, the faint ring of metal felt balanced, measured, almost peaceful. She stopped near range 47. The sand there still held faint footprints from weeks before hers, Mercer's, June's. Ghosts of the day everything changed. She knelt, ran her fingers through the grit, and whispered, "Forgiven." Not to anyone, maybe just to the ground. A shadow moved behind her. Couldn't sleep either. It was Keene. She carried 2 mugs of coffee, both steaming. Cross accepted one. Storm's quieter tonight. Keene smiled. Maybe it learned respect. They stood side by side, looking out at the endless horizon. "You ever wonder," Keene said, "if it was worth it, all of it?" Cross thought for a long time before answering. "It has to be," she said finally. "Otherwise the pain wins." Keene nodded, eyes glinting in the starlight. "You changed me, Commander." Cross looked at her. "Good, then keep changing others. That's how this lives on." They clinked mugs lightly, the sound small but sure against the night. When dawn came, the desert turned gold again. The first whistle of morning drills echoed across the field. June Carter's voice crackled through the loudspeaker, steady, confident. "Unit Bravo ready on range 9. Begin on my mark." Cross smiled faintly. She didn't need to be everywhere anymore. The culture was taking care of itself. She slipped her hands behind her back, feeling the faint pull against her ribs, a reminder, not a limitation. The pain was still there, but it no longer defined her. Somewhere in the distance, a recruit shouted an order, crisp, respectful. The response came unified. That was enough. She turned toward the barracks, whispering to no one. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And with that, Avery Cross walked away from range 47 for the last time, not broken, not healed, just whole.